You are watching Hillsborough Television, programming that keeps you informed about the services and activities of your county government.
Hello and welcome to Beyond Today, the program that addresses the future of our community through conversations with people who are working today for a better tomorrow. I'm Ray Shermonte, your host for Beyond Today and Assistant Executive Director for the Hillsborough County City-County Planning Commission. In our recent shows, we've asked our planning commissioners to be present to tell us something about themselves and how they became involved in planning. Today we have our newest planning commissioner, Jim Beeler of the City of Tampa, and also Terry Cobb, a county appointee. Jim, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your background in Tampa. Were you born here, or how did you come to live in our city?
I am one of the few natives left. Actually, my family's been here since the Civil War, and
wow.
My parents still live in the house my great grandfather built in South Tampa, and that's one of the reasons I got involved. Is long family history in the city.
That's great. And you got involved in planning when and how?
Well, actually, I first got involved in my neighborhood association. When I bought my first house down in a little neighborhood called Fair Oaks, Manhattan Manor, I asked the neighbors, how do I join the neighborhood association, and discovered there wasn't one. So my wife and I stupidly went and knocked on 800 doors and took on that project and started a neighborhood association. From there, I got involved with Tampa Homeowners, the Association of Neighborhood Associations for the City of Tampa, and then along the way, I got suckered into being president one year. It was a lot of fun, but it was an awful lot of work, and I certainly wish luck to whoever is doing it. Warren Bourgeois is doing it now, and whoever will be doing it next. It'll certainly be a lot of work on their part. And then we moved to the Greg Abels Bon Air Southern Pines neighborhood in South Tampa, and I was involved there, still involved. And along the way, Margaret Vizzi talked me into being on the Planning Commission Citizens Advisory Committee. And from there, I gained an appreciation for planning and learned a lot about it, and had a lot of input on that committee, and eventually made my way to being a planning commissioner.
Now, since you got involved, it sounds like this must have been over a number of years.
Yeah, I first really got involved in the neighborhood associations about 1990, and then I think it was around 92 or 93 that I got on the Citizens Advisory Committee for the City of Tampa, and I was on that committee for 4 or 5 years. And then we went through a couple of rewrites of the Tampa Comprehensive Growth Management Plan, during which we added the neighborhood element, which I was very proud of. We were sitting around a meeting one day, and I asked the question, well, why don't we have a neighborhood element? You know, silly me. And of course it started growing and became a chapter in the plan, which I was very excited about. And the more I got into it, then of course, you know, you want to be on the other side of the table asking the questions instead of posing the questions, or you know, providing input.
Now, having been around Tampa a long time, what are the changes you've seen as far as citizen involvement? Is there more or less than there used to be, or
well,
how
in
has
the
it changed?
In the time I've been involved, it seems like there's more and more people getting involved. Just as I did when I moved into my first neighborhood and said, why don't we have a neighborhood association? People across the city of Tampa are doing that, and I think it's very exciting that you can look at the map today and there's little bits and pieces of the city that aren't organized, but large chunks of the city have become organized into neighborhood associations, and eventually, you know, I think we'll have all the residential neighborhoods organized. I think it's much easier on the city and the county and the Planning Commission and the Variance Board and all these other boards to communicate when there's an organized group and you know who the leadership is, as opposed to a project happening and then everybody's jumping up and down screaming and hollering because they weren't notified. So I think the communication is good in that people are providing input into what they want their city to do, but the city's also, it's much easier for them to communicate back to the citizens where they're going.
Well, this kind of goes against the idea that there's a lot of apathy then. Where you're coming from, then you see more involvement on the part of citizens in the community.
I think so, but then again, I'm interfacing with activist people, you know, out there in the world, but it seems like there's more and more activists The idea that the old idea in politics, all politics is local. People are most interested in the pothole in front of their house and the broken storm sewer and the broken sidewalk. Those are the things that really get them because they see that every single day. And then once you get involved in that, then it sort of grows. you get real involved in your neighborhood, and I think it's growing.
Jim, what do you do for a living? I didn't ask you that before, but
I work for a company that we do screen printing, embroidery, and promotional products, and I have a specialty in museum store product development, and we do a lot of products for restaurant chains and hotel chains. In fact, most of my clients aren't in this area. They're national clients that we ship products to all across the country. And then I have my own business as well that does the museum store product development.
well, you kind of bring a small businessman's perspective, I guess, to planning.
Yeah, and I mean, this is my city. I was born here. I was raised here. I've had the good fortune to travel all across the country and to other countries and enjoyed it. But you know, this is where I plan to make my home for the rest of my life. So I want this city to be as good as it can be, because I don't plan to go anywhere.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the problems, I guess, that you feel we're facing from a planning perspective in the city and the county too, since you have to look at those issues?
Well, I think starting with the city, probably our biggest problem is transportation. We've got a lot of roads that are over capacity, and I think if you ask the citizens what it is that bothers them the most, after crime, the next thing is probably going to be traffic intrusion into their neighborhoods, cut through traffic, speeding, those sorts of things. When you've got little kids out playing on a street, as we have on my street, and you've got cut through traffic, people wanting to get from point A to point B at a faster pace than a particular road will allow them. There's this nice little quiet residential street and it's a straight shot, you know, boom, 45 miles an hour, they're heading through. I think the city council lowering the speed limit to 25, once those signs go up, that'll have an impact. And I think the county's biggest problem is trying to keep up with the outward growth. You know, the idea of subdivisions that keep leapfrogging each other and getting further and further out, you know, providing the services, the cost to the existing citizen tax base of providing those services further out, I think is going to be a bigger and bigger problem for the county.
Now, we have concepts in the plan. I know you're new, but I think you're somewhat familiar, like the urban service area. I mean, do you see those concepts as good ideas to try to control this leapfrog development? Yes,
absolutely. I think anything we can do to reduce the cost to taxpayers is paramount in my mind. Now, we have to have growth. Growth is very important. It's, you know, I think the three pillars of Florida economy are tourism, agriculture, and construction. So we have to be mindful that the construction industry is very important for our area and it's very important for the economy. But channeling that growth so that we can get infill development, you know, especially in the older parts of the city that already have water and sewer and roads, and in many cases lots of capacity, but no one's building there. So revitalizing those inner city neighborhoods so that they are desirable and people do want to build new housing projects, as we're seeing in South Tampa, and I think Seminole Heights, West Tampa I think is the next candidate for, you know, just happening on its own. East Tampa, the city's putting a lot of effort into Tampa Heights and certain parts of East Tampa. You know, you can't do it all at once, but you can pick on certain areas where there's good housing stock and where there's roads and water and sewer, and start renovating and making it happen. Of course, the citizens, you know, a little elbow grease on the part of citizens and neighborhood associations getting excited about improving their neighborhoods makes the city's job so much easier, you know, when it happens on its own.
Mm-hmm. What do you think when you try to, I guess, sell somebody on the idea of returning to the city or doing infill housing? What do you sell them with? I mean, how do you compete with the suburbs in marketing the city?
Well, I think convenience. I mean, I personally would not choose to live in a suburb on the edge of town because I want to be able to get to the restaurants, I want to be able to get to the museums, I want to be able to get to the cultural events. Where I live, which is essentially at the corner of Kennedy and Dale Mabry, I'm 4 or 5 minutes from almost everything I want to do. I can walk to certain things. In fact, you know, a little more density to me would be a great thing. I love visiting cities like Boston, New York, where there's a subway and you can hop on the subway and be anywhere for $1, which is exciting. I don't know that I'd want to live there because their quality of life isn't as good as ours. And again, we have to be mindful of that. You don't want so much growth that you choke off what's great about the area. But improving density so that it is easier to have a transportation system if you're going to have one, or at least have one that can break even. That's always a goal. But the burbs don't excite me. The houses all look alike. They're, you know, I just personally prefer the urban area, and I think more and more young people, as they're looking for their homes, they want something that has a little character. It has some meaning. My house is 70 years old, and I can't imagine living in a new house. I look at them and I find them interesting. You know, they have certain amenities, but you know, to be able to drive, to have to drive an hour to get home at the end of the day doesn't seem like you're doing much for your quality of life. I mean, it takes me 10 minutes to go home, 5 minutes to go home, depending on the traffic, and that's very exciting.
Well, I think probably more and more people would agree with you. I think as we have the housing market kind of become more diverse, you have people that have different tastes, so they may question the same things that you're discussing, and I think that's important, the assets you brought up about the city.
Well, there's always going to be, I think, a certain amount of built-in desire for these suburban homes. People who have a lot of kids and they want a big yard, and they, you know, they want a lot of house, and they, you know, a lot of house for the money. The further out you go, the cheaper it's going to be. You're going to pay for that, however, in increased transportation costs of getting back and forth. Now, if you live in the suburbs and your office is in the suburbs, or you work in the suburbs, then that makes a lot of sense because you're not far away from where you are. But if you work in West Shore and live in Brandon, that's an awful lot of driving every day. You know, so you might want to move to town and country so you're a little closer. And I'm sure the Veterans Expressway is going to create more growth up in that direction.
Is there some detriment, I guess, or what does the city need to work on to really, again, compete more? You talked about the good things, but what do you see as the negative things that maybe need to be overcome to sell the city to prospective home buyers?
I think there's a perception that crime is a problem, and as we've looked at the statistics, we see that crime is dropping. I mean, I think the city, I think there's some demographic factors that are impacting that, but I also think that a number of changes that have been instituted at the city, the Chase policy, for instance, is having an impact on driving crime down. I mean, there's always a high-profile thing that happens that makes the paper, and so people's perception is that crime is up because the news people, you know, if it bleeds it leads, as their saying goes. You know, they're always starting off with the doom and gloom because it's exciting and interesting, and you know, it's a great lead in for their news. The paper probably does that same thing to a certain degree. You know, something awful happens and it's right there on the front of Metro or on the front of the front page. But I think if we can get the perception that crime is a real problem in the city, I think if you look at the statistics and you look at certain areas in town, the crime statistics are lower in the city in certain places than they are in areas like Brandon or even, you know, in the North End. There was a perception for many years that Ybor City was a dangerous place to go, and in reality there wasn't much crime there because there weren't very many people there and there weren't very many businesses. It was forbidding. You know, I spent most of the 80s wandering through Ybor City going, why doesn't something happen here? But back when I was in college, I spent a lot of time in clubs down there. But it's you know, it just, I think, perception.
Well, I think you got your answer on Ybor City. Obviously, things are happening now.
Oh, it certainly is.
Things are changing. Well,
Tough to get a parking space.
Yes, really. Well, I think what you said is really, if people would look around, they can see a lot of redevelopment occurring in the city, and I think the ideas you're talking about. But you think probably the perception of crime, then, if we can overcome that.
I think so. I mean, well, I think there's a number of factors. One, perception. Two, a lot of the available housing stock needs renovations, and you know, there are people out there that are willing to do that and desirous of doing that, and there are other people who look at it and go, "This is too much work. I just want to buy a new house." And you see in certain neighborhoods in town, little houses getting torn down and lots of bigger houses going up. That's because land values are so high. Other areas of town, there's existing housing stock that's just fine. It just needs a little paint, needs a little TLC. But you don't necessarily get the amenities in an older house automatically that you do in a newer house. But you can buy them cheaper and put your own amenities in. It just, you know, you have to have vision. You know, I look at areas like West Tampa, and I see all these houses and I go, wow, what these could be if you just, some people came in and did a little elbow grease. It's, you know, they're great neighborhoods. The housing stock is wonderful. It's just a little vision and a lot of effort.
Right. Thank you for being with us today, Jim, and I think your ideas are going to be very good on the Planning Commission. We'll be right back with Terry Cobb, our county, unincorporated county appointee. Welcome back to Beyond Today. We'd like to welcome Terry Cobb, who was recently appointed by the Board of County Commissioners to serve on the Planning Commission for unincorporated county. Terry, I'd like to ask you, what is your background in Hillsborough County?
Well, I've been in Hillsborough County since 1975, not quite as long as Jim has, but long enough to see a lot of the problems that I experienced. My last home was in Miami. So I watched a lot of unsupported growth, and you had to get interested in it or leave, one or the other.
So you decided to leave, I guess, and come to Tampa.
Well, yes, I got married and moved to Tampa,
Okay.
and I've watched a tremendous amount of growth since then, and I think unplanned growth invariably gets us in trouble. So the idea of being able to contribute in some way was very appealing to me.
25 years is a long time, and we certainly have had a lot of growth in the last 25 years. What is your occupation? What do you do for a living?
I work in television production. I freelance in films and in television production. And we get to see quite a bit of the city. I do location scouting. So I'm on the roads a lot when I'm doing that. And to drive around for 8 or 10 hours a day on roads that are not adequate is really, it's a good reminder of the fact that something has to be done.
Well, I guess that's a good segue into the idea that having roads that don't operate at their capacity correctly really can hurt business, I guess, if it takes you longer to get
Absolutely.
around and do what you need to do. It's not just commuters.
And we've worked with production companies from LA who have said, this is just as bad as our freeways.
Oh, no.
Well, they are not that bad, let me tell you that, but they are pretty bad, and it gets quite clogged up, and they notice it when they
Right.
come in.
I have to say that's a concern, having been to Los Angeles, if somebody is even comparing
Really?
us to that. Well, you've said that you do a lot of locational shots, so I would assume you've seen changes to the way the community looks. What do you notice, I guess, over the last 25 years? What's changed?
I'm one of the people who lives out in the, I won't say urban sprawl area, but I live in a rural area. And so I come in on the Veterans Expressway, and I've noticed a tremendous amount of growth out there. People, in spite of the fact infill is very important and we want to encourage people to build in the urban areas, there are always going to be people who want to live in the rural areas. We have a lot of citrus groves where we are, but you know, they're being gobbled up and people want to build their homes out there, and the roads are getting more and more crowded, without question.
And that's probably even people just driving through the area from more built-up areas.
Indeed, it is. And I grew up in a city myself. I grew up in New York, and I also had the ability to hop on a subway or take a bus or a trolley even and get where I was going. But here, you can't really do anything else but take your car, and it's just, there has to be some better way.
So you, I guess, believe in more of a choice in transportation systems?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think people would respond. I've been to Washington, D.C. on many trips, and the metro there gets you wherever you want to go. It would never occur to me to drive a car in that area. It's wonderful to hop on the subway and get where you're going. And I'm not a strong advocate of trains as such, but I do see a very strong need for public transportation of some sort that's consistent and available and gets some of the cars off the road.
And probably more, I guess, than what we have now.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I think
more.
as our roads become more crowded, the need for that will become evident. Now, you talked a little bit about the rural areas. How do you feel we can protect these areas, or should we?
Well, it's very important. In fact, I heard Commissioner Frank say today, people will not give up eating. We have to have farms. We have to have agriculture. We're a very big agricultural county, and we need that, and we have to preserve that land. But as long as people have no incentives for infill and for moving into the cities, and they want to come out, they're going to buy that land up, and pretty soon we're not going to be a big agricultural county. And I think that's a very important thing, to preserve that land for use as agricultural land.
Well, you talked a little bit about incentives. What kind of things do you feel, as kind of a new planning commissioner, we could do to encourage infill development?
I have heard some things about financial incentives. For instance, if a developer felt that by building in available land within the city, he was not going to have to pay impact fees, I don't see why he wouldn't look at that. And if he went out to the urban sprawl area, so to speak, and he was going to have to pay quite a bit on that, well, it's going to make him think it's definitely financially sensible to do that. And the houses will be less, because if you start adding impact fees, it really adds to the price of the house.
So you, I guess, see government in a way as trying to encourage this kind of infill through tax policies or
sense.
impact fees
Absolutely.
to get more of that development.
Absolutely.
Now, I guess, are you familiar with our urban service area concept that we
Yes.
discuss a lot? I mean, do
I
you
am.
see that as a positive or?
As a person who lives out there, I'm perfectly willing myself to forego certain utilities, for instance. I'm one of those bad people on a well and septic tank, but I'm willing not to have that. I don't want the county to have the expense of coming all the way out there to meet me and put in a sewer system. So I think that the people who want the services should definitely have a reason for building closer to the into the urban service area, where it's available, it's less expensive. I mean, if they came out there to bring it to me, it would cost a great deal of money because they have to run those pipes so far. And that's fine. I don't want it. And I know many people out there who don't want it. But without question, there are people who want the services, and they should be encouraged to know where the urban service area is and to build in that area.
So I guess what you're really saying is that people should expect a different level of service in a rural area
Yes.
than in an urban area, and that's okay.
It is
from your
okay.
perspective.
It's okay from my perspective, and many neighbors whom I speak with, some of them I think would have been happy with dirt roads. They don't want
Probably
anybody
true.
coming out. I'm not that extreme.
Right.
However, I do think that people they have their own niche. Either they want to be in the city and walk around and take advantage of those services, or they want to be out in the country and left alone. And I think that's fine. I think the problem has been people trying to service the people in the country with the same amount of service, and that's just not logical.
Well, and probably what that does is it encourages the country to transition into the city. Since you have the services there,
Sure.
it's logical to try to take advantage of them, and that is a problem. I think that's what we are trying to address, but as you well know, it's difficult at
Yes,
times to
it
do
is.
that.
I think the Planning Commission has impressed me greatly with the fact that they are there. We are all there to try to make this better. You know, you don't hear a lot about anyone with an axe to grind or a particular thing to push. Everybody is trying to make our quality of life better. It's very important to me. I remember when I first moved into Florida in '53, you could roll a bowling ball down the middle of the biggest street in town in the summer and nobody would even hear it. But now people live here year-round, and certainly in Tampa. Tampa's a cosmopolitan little city, and the quality of life is very important.
Now, when you first came to Hillsborough County, did you immediately move to the country, or did you ever live in the city?
Actually, I did live further down. We lived in the Lake Magdalene area, and that I can't say if that's within the city. I think it's just outside
It's probably
the
just
city.
outside, but
But it was an urban service area, and we had a lot of. It was very convenient and very nice. But once the kids were out of school, and we had the desire to live in a place that was different, and that's why we moved out.
well, I think one of the things that becomes evident is at different stages in a person's life, they might want to live in a different area, in a
Exactly.
rural, suburban, or urban.
Our next move
area.
might be into the city. I don't know.
Right. You just don't know, and it's good to have all those things available.
Yes, it is.
Now, when you look at this area, I guess other than growth, what do you see as big problems that we need to address?
I think water quality is extremely important, and I live on a lake, so I've been very conscious of the water issues. And I think there is a tendency to make quick decisions when it comes to water issues that we regret 20 years down the line. The water is a very important resource. It has to be kept clean, it has to be available, and it's very important to me that we watch that as it will end. I mean, it's not something that has to be thought of as forever. This water will be here forever and it will be clean. That's not really the case, and that is a big concern of mine.
Unfortunately, I think a lot of people take that for granted. It's
Yes.
just almost expected that you have lots of water. I'm always preaching to my kids
That's
about
true.
that.
And you know, when I first moved here, the bay was filthy and it was polluted, and there were a lot of serious problems there. And now it's improved quite a bit, and I think that's wonderful. That's what we need to do. We need to protect the Hillsborough River. We need to protect our water, our drinking water source.
You know, actually, in a positive perspective, I think you're right, because I lived here before, but I moved back here in the early 70s, and the bay was dirtier. And actually, I think the air was dirtier then also. And both seem to have improved over the last 25 years. So some things are getting better,
Yes.
and that is good.
Yesterday reminded me a little bit of the smog in LA. I know it was fog and not smog, but when I looked around, I thought, oh, gee. We flew into the Denver airport, and you could see just this huge black cloud, which amazed me. But they have an enormous amount of pollution there. And I thought, I don't want to live in a place that has that, and I don't want our city to have that either. And that goes for the water as well.
Well, I think it's interesting when you travel around, you do see things like that. We forget, actually, our air for the size city is fairly clean, although we're getting a little more marginal. But I don't think we would want to end up like Denver or Los Angeles.
No, definitely not.
Well, I think, and that's where transit comes in to help that also.
I think there are a lot of options that I've heard. The problem is most people think that there should be a transportation system that pays for itself. And I think the more I read about it, the more I realize that that is something that's there to help the people, and it probably will never pay for itself. But that shouldn't be the criteria.
My answer is always, does Dale Mabry pay for itself?
Exactly.
I don't think so. So I'm not sure that any transportation system can.
I don't think so either.
Well, just a capsule, what is your vision, I guess, for the next 20 years for Tampa Bay and Tampa? What would you like to see us become?
I would like to see a really realistic growth pattern. You know, not something where the economy's good and people are working, so that let's slap up another 50 homes. It would be really nice to see things. I would love to see more of a design element added to the zoning rules and regulations, so that people have more than a strip shopping center to look at. You know, when you see some of the creative things that people do, you realize this could be a charming place. And I noticed we were out in Palm Beach, not Palm Beach, Florida, Palm Beach, California, and they had, even the 5 and dime type stores had a design element and looked made out of the adobe and looked as if it fit into the area, and it looked beautiful. And I thought, well, we could do that. We don't need these little square boxes, you know. And I would like to see that, so that when you walk around, there's something pleasing to your eyes.
So I guess the way the community looks, you'd like to see improvements in that. Well, I think most planners would agree with you. Well, Commissioner Cobb, I'd like to thank you for being on our show and welcome you to the Planning Commission.
Thank you very much.